Good morning, Table Tribe. It is great to have you here this morning. Before we begin our time together on Won't You Be My Neighbor, Part 5, we're almost done. We've got one more week left. I just want to let you in on a conversation that I had this week. It's been a tough couple months. It's been even more of an interesting week. And I just want you to know, I've been struggling with the words to say, the things to say, the right words to say. What if I say things wrong? And so the only thing that, and the reason why we haven't said anything here at this point, it's not that I don't care. It's not that I'm being silent. It's that I don't know what to say. And if I do say something, I want it to be well thought out. And so I just want to give you a sneak peek this morning. One of the things I did was I contacted one of my good friends. And I don't say that just to say he's a good friend. Our families get together. We are constantly in conversation about ministry and life and loving each other and supporting each other. But I called my good friend Nate. And we've talked about Nate here at the table. But you get to meet him today. And here's just a snapshot at our conversation that we had that I think would be so helpful for all of you to watch. It's about 40 minutes long. We're going to give you a link in the description box down below where you can go and you can watch that whole thing. But I just want to give you a snapshot of it. And here are some of the things that we talked about this morning.
It can feel really disingenuous to just talk, right? So to just say the right thing or what you perceive to be the right thing or whatever it is on a banner or a billboard or some Facebook post that you stole and reposted, right? That can feel really disingenuous, especially for people who you have real relationships with, or in our cases, have the real responsibility to lead. And I'm talking about parents, I'm talking about church staff, I'm talking about teachers, I'm talking about politicians, I'm talking about when you have the responsibility to lead. I think it's fair and acceptable to think, pray, process, and then respond, as opposed to racing against the clock just to say something for the sake of not being silent.
Table that you prepared for me in the presence of my enemies. It's your body and your blood you shed for me. This is how I fight my battles. There's a table that you prepared for me of my enemies. It's your body and your blood you shed for me. This is how I fight my battle. And I believe you overcome, and I will live my soul of praise for all you've done. This is how I fight my battles. 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 This is how. In the valley, I know that you're with me. And surely your goodness and your mercy follow me. So my weapons are praise and thanksgiving. This is how I fight my battle. I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how my victories in Jesus' name. 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 This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how.
Good morning, Table family. Thank you again for joining us online for church. We are in week 5 of our series, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And like we've been doing every week, we got my segment, Won't You Meet My Neighbors? This week, I want to highlight my neighbors, Fred and Lori. Fred and Lori are kind of like the parents of the neighborhood, but in a good way. They kind of watch over things, make sure everyone's doing what they should be doing, and if there's any danger, they are on it. Once we had an electrical pole that was smoking, and Fred comes over and he's all about taking care of it. Before we even knew what was happening, the fire department was called and like 2 police units showed up. There's been times where the boys have gotten a Nerf gun stuck in the tree and they've been trying to get it out, and Fred will run over and hop up and knock it down for him. It's things like that that make Fred and Lori super awesome neighbors. We're very thankful for them. In a couple weeks, I'm so excited, we begin a new series called Jumping Ship with Jonah, where we discover how to do what we don't want to do when God is calling us to do something. That's a tongue twister. So last Sunday, the weirdest thing happened. Debbie, who's our administrative assistant, said she was bringing lunch over. So we headed out in our driveway to help her carry things in, and all of a sudden we heard honking and screaming, and cars started driving by with all kinds of goodies, notes, cards, gifts. And that was you guys, the table, saying thank you for everything that Brad does. Our family could not be more appreciative of the table, and we just really want to say a genuine thank you to every single person who makes our church what it is and is the family and community for us. Thank you. To start off our time together today, we like to talk during the talk. So think about this question. Discuss with somebody around you, or you can write it down, a time when it was really difficult to say no.
Good morning, Table Tribe. My name is Katie, and I'm one of the pastors here, and we are in week 5 of Won't You Be My Neighbor? And I'm so excited because you get to hear from your favorite dynamic duo, Katie and Brad. Ta-da! And this morning, we are going to be talking about what Jesus says about boundaries and others. So, that's the intro. So maybe you're like me and you have a really hard time telling people no. I didn't realize that this was a problem for me until I started meeting with a mentor and they told me, Katie, since I've known you, you have a really hard time telling people no and you have no boundaries in your personal life and work life. And ouch, did that sting a little because I feel like I can totally say no to people. But the more that we talked about it, over the last year actually, I've realized that I struggle to tell people no. And it's because I have this fear that when I tell someone no, I'm going to let them down or they won't like me after that, or it'll cause conflict in our relationship. And I hate conflict. I avoid it at all costs. I'm a people pleaser. I want to keep everyone happy all the time, which is completely impossible and absurd to even think that I could do that. Now that I've been completely vulnerable and transparent with you, I think a question that I continuously ask is, why do we struggle to tell people no? And I think it's because we feel like we are the only ones who can do the job and the task at hand, or we feel incredibly responsible for others, or we have a fear of letting others down. I think the list can go on and on based on you personally and the situations that you're facing. But I think one thing that we all have in common is that we think that we can be everywhere all the time and be everything to everyone. And we think that we can't say no. But what I've learned over the last year is that sometimes if we don't say no, we can cause more damage to ourselves and others. So what if maybe your no could help someone grow and move them forward? But I think this is our struggle. We don't know when to say no because we don't know when no is the right response. I think based on our circumstances, we don't know if no will help or hurt the situation. So Brad's going to tell us a little bit more about what Jesus has to say about this.
Well, Katie has given us a wonderful example this morning of the struggle that you and I go through every day, and not just in our personal relationships, but when it comes to our neighboring relationships as well. The story we're going to look at this morning is one that people have heard throughout history. And in fact, it's not just Christians who've heard this story, but if you've never been to church or you're not familiar with the Bible, there's probably a good chance that you've heard this parable or this story told before, which comes from Jesus. And he's in the middle of being duped into this trick question about who was our neighbor and how do we love them. And so he tells this famous story, but it's crazy because this story has been used by Christians all across the world to say, hey, you need to get messy, you need to get your hands dirty, and you need to go to extremes to care for people in need. Which, by the way, is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to care for people. But one of the things I want to talk about today is that it can become unhealthy. That sometimes we get to a place where there's unhealthy relationships and we contribute to those by not saying no. And so this morning, I want to dive into this story, and I think we're going to make some points today that perhaps you've never heard before when it comes to this parable. So let's dive right in this morning. Here's what it says. There was once a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and on the way he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, they beat him up, they went off leaving him half dead, and luckily there was a priest on his way down the same road. But when he saw this man who was beat up, he angled across the road to the other side. And then a Levite, this religious man, showed up, and he also avoided the injured man. A Samaritan, traveling down the road, came to him. And when he saw the man's condition, check this out, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds, and then he lifted him onto the donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take good care of him. If it costs any more, you can just put it on my bill. You can just put it on my tab when I get back or when I'm on my way back. I'll pay you. It's not a big deal. Then check this out. Jesus says this. He says, what do you think? Which of the three became a neighbor to the man attacked by the robbers? The religious scholar says, the one who treated him kindly. And Jesus says, go and do the same. So one of the things I love about being a pastor is having the opportunity to help people. I love working with people who are dealing with addictions. I love helping people who are going through mental struggles, especially like right now, we're dealing with anxiety and depression and questions, and we're not sure how to process everything. And this is a dark season of life, and it's fun to be able to talk with people and to connect with them about what's going on. I love working, Janelle and I love working with married couples. It's a great opportunity to help better their marriage, and we work with couples who are getting married, and so we're trying to set them up for success. And so I love as a pastor to help people. But the problem is that there's a fine line, and sometimes I don't know when I've crossed it. There's a fine line between helping people and hurting people when they're in the process of getting healthy. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, it is a struggle. And the struggle comes down to this idea of what would Jesus do in this moment? You remember the bracelets, they came out in the mid-90s and everybody was wearing them, and what would Jesus do in this moment? And by the way, I'm not putting it down. It's a great reminder. It's very helpful. But sometimes when I look at that bracelet, it actually takes me to a place that causes me to cross a line that actually hurts people. Here's what I mean. Have you ever considered, maybe we should change the name of the bracelet to what would Jesus not do? Right? There are things and moments that we can see in the life of Jesus. There are things that he would not do. One of them is that Jesus would not put up. He would not put up with the system that abused, marginalized, and poor and continued the injustice of the system. I mean, you talk about something that hits home right in this moment. Jesus wouldn't put up with it. He would not put up with people's excuses for living a lesser life than what they were supposed to be living. Like, we are all created and made for something. We were designed for something. And when Jesus would encounter people, there were always the excuses. And Jesus would not put up with that. One of the things I love too about Jesus, and again, this is a struggle as a pastor, is Jesus wouldn't chase people down when they didn't choose him. Like there are multiple stories where Jesus offers somebody an amazing life, an amazing opportunity, and they don't take him up on it. In fact, they don't choose him. But Jesus doesn't chase them down. He doesn't turn them around. He doesn't beg them to stop for just a minute. He just lets them go. And I think what we can learn in this moment is that Jesus does embrace the mess. We have a responsibility to get our hands dirty, to get in the middle of it, to be part of it. But at the same time, there are just some things that Jesus won't do. And he has boundaries. He embraces the mess, but he still has boundaries. And I love that in this story, we find the Good Samaritan sitting there. And well, he wasn't sitting there. He was actually walking by, and he saw this man. And in the story, it says that his heart went out to him. I want us to understand the significance of this word, to. Notice it doesn't say that this man felt responsibility for him. It just says, hey, his heart went out to him. In the fine line for so many of us is when we move from having a heart that goes out to them to suddenly feeling like we have liability for them, responsibility for them. And what I mean by that, and I'm not doing a good job of expressing it in this moment, but there's a shift that takes place in relationships, neighboring relationships, personal relationships, where suddenly your heart goes out to them and you're helping them, but then the relationships shifts to this place where now all of a sudden you seem to be the one to blame. I mean, you're the reason why they're in this predicament. You're the reason they're having this problem. And all of a sudden, You are responsible for the blame, for the liability, for the reason why they are where they are. And that is a time where it becomes unhealthy, because they ultimately are responsible for the mess that they're in. And we can find ourselves in a dark place feeling like we can't make a difference. We didn't do it right. Like, what did we do wrong? And the truth is, you have a responsibility to them, but you are not responsible for them. In fact, the Samaritan set limits. The Samaritan set limits in this moment. And I think that is so important. We have responsibility to embrace the mess, but we must also set boundaries. I mean, that is so key. In order for us to remain healthy, in order for there to be a healthy relationship, we always embrace the mess, but we must begin by setting boundaries.
This is a great time to continue the conversation with one another. Discuss a time when not having boundaries in a relationship led to an unhealthy outcome.
Up to this point, we've been talking about this idea of just saying no. Like, that there are times in our life where the best thing to do is to say no. But the struggle for so many of us is that we don't want to say no because we know that we're going to let people down if we do. And nobody wants to let someone down. And so there is this fine line between getting messy, getting our hands dirty, and still maintaining a healthy relationship, and all of a sudden it becoming hurtful in the process of getting people healthy. And so we've said so far that, hey, you need to embrace the mess, you need to be part of it, but you need to set boundaries. And I think this is such a struggle for so many of us. You're saying, in fact, some of you are saying right now, hey, I don't know how to set boundaries. Like, where do I start? I've got this friend, or maybe you actually have a neighbor who doesn't have boundaries, and you're like, I need to set some boundaries, but I don't know how. Well, part of the issue goes back to this idea that we have to stop thinking about the fact that we are responsible for. When we do this, we take on a Messiah complex. And when we have a Messiah complex, we think we are the only one who can solve people's problems. I mean, you've met somebody, maybe you are that person. Like, you feel like you're the only one, you're the smartest one, you're the brightest one, you're the best one to take care of everybody's issues, and anybody else that tries to speak into it, well, they're pretty much an idiot. And so you go around, or I go around, and we're trying to fix everybody's problems, which, by the way, is a problem because you don't have boundaries, because sometimes I don't have boundaries. And so I want you to know this, that sometimes a natural way to set boundaries in the middle of messy relationships is empowering others. Wow. Empowering others is a natural way to set boundaries. In fact, I want to go back to this story for just a minute, because I don't know if you caught this, maybe you did, but here's what Luke says, and here's what Jesus tells us in the story. It says, in the morning, he took out 2 silver coins. The Samaritan took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take good care of him. If it costs any more, just come on, put it on my bill. Not a big deal. When I get back on my way, I'll just pay it off. Shouldn't be a big deal. And then Jesus says, what do you think? Talking to the religious scholar, says, what do you think? Which of the 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by the robbers? The religious man responds, the one. The one who? The one who treated him kindly. So I want to go back to Jesus' question for just a second, because it is such a good question. He asked in this story, which of the 3 became a neighbor to the man that was attacked? Now, I want to pull a Jesus move for just a second, and I actually want to ask a question to Jesus' question, which is this: why doesn't Jesus say, which of the four? That's right. There are four people involved in this equation. There are the two that walked by, there is the Samaritan that stopped by, and then there's the innkeeper that continued the care. But the question is almost, just to kind of continue the whole theme going on, it's almost like a trick question. But interestingly, I think the righteous man gets it right. Notice he doesn't say the two who, the Samaritan and the innkeeper. He says the one who met his needs. And I think this is so powerful for us to understand, is that when we empower other people, our care continues through them. What essentially the righteous man is saying in this moment, and what Jesus wants us to understand exactly at this time, is that when we empower other people, our care continues through them. That we don't have to have the Messiah complex. We don't always need to be the person that is front and center. Rather, we are called as followers of Jesus to empower other people. And when we empower other leaders and make disciples of other people, suddenly our care, our love, our legacy continues to live through them. Which is why the righteous man says, the one who. But it's even more nuanced than that. And there's a whole nother side to this. And it reminds me of what we talk about when we go to weddings. You know this? When we go to weddings, we talk about the two becoming one. That you will no longer know the difference between the two. And it is a picture of unity. And that's why the righteous man's answer, the one who, is so powerful. Because it is a picture of two different people coming together on a united front to make a difference for somebody's life. And I love how the psalmist says it. He says, where two or more come together, where people are united, God's blessing is poured out there. It's a wonderful psalm. But it's so true. As these two people come together and as they care for this man, God's blessing. Where there is unity, there is blessing. This man experiences love. He experiences compassion. He experiences care. And guess what? There's no difference between the two who took care of them, because to him, it felt like one. And so, I would just encourage you, as you set boundaries in your life, it's not about you. It's about who you empower. Because when you empower other people, your care continues through them.
What we want you to know today is that by learning to say no begins with boundaries and empowering others. I think that we can all think of situations or circumstances in our life where we should have said no. And this life is messy. Loving, caring, and serving for people is messy. And being a good neighbor can be messy. But Jesus invites us to embrace the mess. Jesus had healthy boundaries, and so should we. And when we have healthy boundaries, we empower others. And that is us caring for the kingdom, the community around us, and our neighbors. So our challenge for you this week is we want you to figure out where in your life do you need to establish boundaries or just say no. And we want you to figure out where in your neighborhood can you embrace the mess and empower others. Thank you for watching this week, and we are so excited that you have followed along this long, and we only have one more week of Won't You Be My Neighbor. And we hope that you are creating memories with all of your neighbors and creating new friendships. Lord, bring someone across my path who needs to know you. Give me the eyes to see them, the ears to listen to them, the arms to embrace them, and the heart to love them well. Amen. I don't know what that is. Okay, I'm done.